It was not a quiet arrival when the winter storm arrived. Despite the fact that it arrived with a kind of menacing presence that seasoned meteorologists warn about days in advance, it nevertheless managed to stun everyone when it eventually unleashed its full might. Snowflakes the size of quarters were spiraling through the air, covering streets, sidewalks, and rooftops in a thick, unrelenting blanket of white. By the time daylight broke over the city, the skyline had been engulfed by a deep gray cloud, and snowflakes were spiraling through the air. What had begun as a regular winter weather alert suddenly escalated into a full-scale disruption, bringing daily life to a grinding halt, and therefore laying the groundwork for a series of unforeseen events to take place. An unprecedented combination of frigid air and warm, moisture-laden winds from the south had fueled the storm system as it rolled in from the Midwest. Forecasters had been tracking the storm system as it approached from the Midwest. The end result was a volatile combination of heavy snowfall, freezing rain, and bone-chilling winds that reduced visibility and made every surface that had not been treated into a potential hazard. Temperatures dropped well below freezing over the course of the night, making it more likely that any precipitation would adhere to the ground and turn into ice by the morning. The conditions were nothing short of dangerous for commuters who regularly navigated the metropolis with the precision of a clockwork mechanism. As early as 6 in the morning, local officials were already asking residents to remain inside their homes, unless it was absolutely necessary for them to travel. Even with their persistent efforts, snowplows were unable to keep up with the quickly falling snow. Snowplows were spread out across main thoroughfares. As a result of drifts that climbed past the height of the curb, side streets vanished, and crossroads turned into slippery traps where automobiles found themselves spinning uncontrollably. There have been delays in service and partial shutdowns reported by public transport systems. The reasons given for these announcements include frozen tracks, blocked bus routes, and safety concerns for both passengers and employees. The storm's wrath was also felt by airports, which were among the first large institutions to be affected. As a result of the ice that formed on the runways, dozens of flights were cancelled, and delicing crews worked around the clock to ensure that planes remained grounded safely. Those who were traveling found themselves unable to leave the airports, staring at departure boards that were covered in red warnings that read "Cancelled." The hotels that were located close to the airports immediately became full as exhausted travelers tried to find places to stay for the night. They were uncertain about when they would be allowed to resume their flights. As a result of the administrator's decision to prioritize the safety of the students, schools followed suit and closed their doors for the day. Parents received robocalls and SMS alerts early in the morning informing them of snow days. This was a relief for children, but it was also a logistical issue for working families who suddenly needed daycare at the last minute. In recognition of the fact that it was an excessive risk to ask employees to brave the roads, some offices made the decision to provide employees with the opportunity to work from home, while others simply shut down totally. Accidents and events due to the weather increased, and emergency services prepared for an increase in the number of calls they received. There has been an increase in the number of minor crashes, motorists who have become stuck, and power outages that have been caused by ice-laden tree limbs snapping under their own weight, according to the police and fire departments. Utility staff were working from bucket trucks and utility poles as they fought against the severe winds and treacherous conditions that they encountered while attempting to restore energy to neighborhoods that had been thrown into darkness. The effects of the storm were felt not only in the realm of transportation and infrastructure, but also in the routines of those who live their lives. A last-minute rush of people stocked up on necessities such as bread, milk, bottled water, and batteries in grocery stores before the shelves were completely emptied out of their available inventory. During the time that individuals were rushing to get their medicines and supplies for the cold weather, pharmacies reported similar scenes. For many of the city's inhabitants, the storm brought back memories of previous winters when the city was rendered inoperable by storms of a similar nature, which heightened their sense of tense expectation. The normally lively streets in the downtown area found themselves shockingly silent. These coffee shops, which relied on the morning rush, closed their doors, and their neon signs became obscured against the snow that was blowing around. Construction sites came to a complete halt, with cranes remaining motionless, as if they were skeletal monuments to the halting of progress. Even well-known monuments, which are more often than not bustling with tourists and commuters, were completely empty, covered in a coating of snow that was both clean and menacing. Local news channels moved to continuous coverage as the storm intensified, broadcasting live from street corners and highway overpasses to chronicle the developing conditions. This was done in order to document events as they occurred. During the transmission of updates, reporters who were bundled up in heavy coats and scarves had a difficult time maintaining their footing. Additionally, their microphones were covered with ice. On an hourly basis, meteorologists updated their snowfall estimates, with each new forecast being more terrifying than the one before it. It was once anticipated that the storm would be a minor one. However, it is now anticipated that it may drop well over a foot of snow in many regions, with wind gusts that are strong enough to cause conditions that are equivalent to a whiteout. Emergency briefings were organized by city officials in order to coordinate response activities. These briefings emphasized the significance of minimizing travel and periodically checking on neighbors who were susceptible. On the other hand, shelters were prepared for an inflow of people who were looking for sanctuary from the cold. Warming centers were opened for those who did not have access to reliable heat. Individual experiences were transformed into a collective narrative of destruction as a result of the proliferation of real-time updates, photographs of buried cars, and videos of circumstances that were dangerously close to blizzard severity on social media. Financial loss was a consequence of the storm for companies that were dependent on foot traffic that occurred in person. There was a cancellation of reservations at restaurants, a postponement of shows at theaters, and an announcement of early retail store closures. Drivers were forced to contend with impassable roads and hazardous conditions, which made it difficult for delivery services to function. The difficulty that even vital personnel had in reporting for duty prompted companies to establish emergency staffing policies in order to meet the demand for their services. In the midst of the mayhem, a sense of community fortitude eventually arose. In order to protect themselves from the cold, neighbors assisted one another in shoveling driveways and sidewalks, and they shared salt and hot beverages. A group of strangers helped release cars that were stuck in snowbanks by providing them with gloved hands and words of encouragement. There were volunteer initiatives organized by online community organizations to check on senior elders and bring supplies to individuals who were unable to leave their homes. Nevertheless, in spite of these instances of togetherness, the overall reality was an undeniable fact. The winter storm had disrupted the normal course of life. The schedules were thrown aside, the plans were put on hold, and the habits were disrupted. The city that never seemed to stop moving was compelled into an unforeseen pause, and it was kept hostage by the unrelenting might of nature. There was no indication that the storm would abate by the middle of the morning. Howling gusts continued to drive snow in waves that were thick and unyielding, and they continued to fall in waves. It was stated that plow drivers were exhausted because they worked long shifts while navigating highways with little visibility and slick conditions. Those who specialize in meteorology warned that the weather could get worse before getting better, and they urged people to be patient and vigilant. An innumerable number of establishments were confronted with the challenging option of whether or not to continue with their regularly planned activities against the backdrop of this disruption and uncertainty. Whether it be hospitals attempting to strike a balance between patient care and staff safety, or media organizations attempting to measure broadcast commitments against logistical constraints, The storm compelled a re-evaluation of priorities within the healthcare industry. It was no longer a matter of whether the winter storm was severe, considering that it was undeniably terrible. Rather, the question was how far its ripple effects would stretch. It would not take long before the answer would become remarkably evident with regard to a well-liked daytime television show. By the time the sun made its way cautiously through the storm clouds, it was abundantly evident that the winter weather had done more than just dust the city with snow. It had essentially walled it off. The realization came to the production team of Live, with Kelly and Mark in waves in the beginning of the show. It was planned that the show would be recorded as normal, and there was a full house of enthusiastic audience members who were ready to applaud, laugh, and clap along with the performance. However, the reality that existed outside of the classroom walls revealed a totally different story. The audience who would hear the recording in the morning had been meticulously selected several weeks in advance. There were some people who had been fans for a long time and had waited months for tickets. On the other hand, there were vacationers who had their entire trip planned around attending the live performance. For the purpose of special outreach initiatives, a few of the organizations that were invited were local school groups and charitable organizations. Every individual had been provided with comprehensive instructions regarding the arrival timings, security procedures, and proper studio etiquette. Under normal conditions, they would already be forming a queue outside the building, surrounded by others who were giddy with excitement, clutching their confirmation emails and taking photographs to capture the occasion. Instead, their mobile devices rang with notifications of weather warnings and emergency situations. The roads were shut down. There was a delay or complete suspension of the underground system. It was difficult for buses to navigate the slippery roads. Because of the snow and ice, the city's transit network, which is typically a wonder of efficiency, was now struggling to function. Many people who were interested in attending the event felt as though they were engaging in an act of disobedience against nature simply by going outside their front doors. Despite this, some people attempted it. A few fans, who were adamant about not letting their opportunity pass them by, bundled themselves up in multiple layers of coats and scarves and attempted to make the journey. They quickly found themselves walking through snow that was up to their knees, only to arrive at bus stops where there were no buses arriving or train platforms where announcements repeated apologies for disruptions in service as they arrived. It was reported that taxi dispatchers were experiencing wait times that extended into the hours, while ride-sharing applications flashed an endless stream of "no cars available" messages. One by one, these resolute travelers gave in to defeat and went back inside, feeling a mixture of dissatisfaction and resignation as they did so. The staff responsible for audience coordination was working as hard as they could behind the scenes at the studio. There was a constant ringing of their phones as guests contacted to inquire about the status of the taping, whether it had been cancelled, postponed, or moved. Emails rushed in with subject lines that ranged from polite enquiries to frantic pleas. The emails were sent quickly. Some individuals were concerned about the possibility of losing their tickets entirely, while others simply desired assurances that they would not be penalized for having to miss the event due to circumstances that were beyond their control. The group did everything in its power to reply in a fast and sensitive manner. They gave everyone the assurance that safety was the most important thing, that tickets would be honored for future tapings for as long as it was practicable, and that no one would be held responsible for staying at home. It was clear that the emotional toll had been taken. Even though it was no one's fault, the prospect of an empty studio seemed like a personal failure for the staff members who took pride in producing a welcoming and inclusive experience for the audience. In the meantime, the production staff started analyzing the consequences of the situation. The presence of a live audience was more than just a backdrop. It was an active, breathing component of the rhythm of the event. Laughter cues, applauding breaks, and spontaneous reactions were all components that contributed to the shaping of the rhythm and manner in which each episode was presented. Laughter would be received differently if there was no audience present. When emotions are present, it may feel more intimate, but it also makes one feel more exposed. Otherwise, the energy of the hosts, which is normally fueled by the enthusiasm of the crowd, would have to come from someplace else. The foyer remained disturbingly quiet as the time that was set for the arrival of audience members inched closer and closer. The typical hum of conversation and the sound of footsteps moving were replaced by the faint whir of heating vents and the muted noises of snow being shoveled outside. As they stood idly by, security personnel, who were accustomed to managing large lines and eager crowds, periodically peered through the glass doors to observe the swirling white world that lay beyond. In light of the hazardous conditions on the roadways, Ripa and Mark Consuelos arrived at the studio earlier than they normally would have. Because of the slow-moving traffic and slippery conditions, they had to navigate with extreme caution. They had also experienced their own travel issues. Their reactions were a mixture of concern and interest when they found out that the audience would not be able to attend the event. Despite the fact that they were concerned about the admirers who had been anticipating the opportunity to meet them in person, they were also fascinated by the peculiar circumstances. According to reports, Kelly made a joke about how "I guess it's just us today," in an effort to lighten the situation. In spite of the fact that it was disheartening, Mark acknowledged that it was also a demonstration of how severe the storm was during the storm. Both hosts were in agreement that in order to proceed responsibly, it was necessary to proceed without an audience. An official decision was reached, which stated that there would be no live audience allowed for the recording of the day. A notification was sent out via mass email and text message to all ticket holders, advising them of the situation and offering your deepest apologies for the inconvenience. In the statement, it was emphasized that the show placed the utmost importance on the safety of its audience, and it expressed gratitude to everyone for their comprehension. Immediate responses came pouring in from all directions. Some fans expressed their profound dissatisfaction, revealing how much they had been anticipating the event and how much they had been looking forward to it. Others communicated their appreciation, expressing their relief at the fact that they would no longer be had to risk traveling in such hazardous conditions. A couple of them even offered words of support to the crew working on the show, recognizing that these were unique circumstances and complimenting the decision to prioritize well-being. The news was especially upsetting for vacationers who had traveled from neighboring states or nations to arrive in the country through aeroplane. They have endured aircraft delays, hotel cancellations, and disruptions to their vacation arrangements, but they were ultimately unsuccessful in overcoming the final obstacle. The irony of being so near to their objective, yet unable to reach it, was something that numerous individuals pondered as they stood outside the windows of their hotels and watched the snow fall. Instead, they decided to take photographs of the storm, and they made the decision to frame them as mementos of a trip that had not gone according to plan. Preparations continued inside the studio, despite the fact that there was a discernible air of weirdness about. Taking into account the fact that there were vacant seats, stage managers changed the camera angles. Recalibrating the microphones was done by sound engineers because they were aware that there would be no background noise to cover up awkward silences. As the set designers struggled to determine how to make the empty audience area appear less noticeable, they discussed whether or not to turn down the house lights or to keep them on full brightness. Also noticing the change in atmosphere were the people responsible for the wardrobe and makeup. The attention gradually shifted inward because there was no audience to impress. Although the host's attire was still painstakingly selected, and their hair and cosmetics were meticulously styled, there was a subtle impression that the performance would be more intimate and more contemplative than it had been previously planned. Producers huddled together in spontaneous meetings, discussing several ways in which the format of the show may be modified. Do they need to acknowledge the absence of the audience while they are on the air? Is it necessary for them to make adjustments to the script in order to accommodate the more tranquil environment? Might it be necessary to eliminate or rethink some segments that were created with the intention of eliciting audience participation? It was clear that the live audience was an integral part of the show's structure, as seen by the fact that each topic prompted debate. Reality began to set in as the minutes ticked closer and closer to the time that the show was scheduled to air. To put it another way, the audience was not only tardy, they were nowhere to be found. When the storm was at its most disruptive, the empty chairs, which were ordinarily occupied by people with happy smiles and eager eyes, stood as silent witnesses to the storm's force. Those members of the crew who had developed ties with frequent attendees, those familiar faces who came back time and time again, felt the absence on a more personal level. They pondered whether those devoted viewers were watching the show from the comfort of their own homes, bundled up in blankets and holding steaming mugs of coffee in their hands, hoping that the show would continue to bring them solace and happiness despite the odd conditions. The storm continued to roar outside, unconcerned by the dissatisfaction and difficulties in terms of logistics that it had caused. Snow had piled up against the doors of the studio, and the wind wailed at the windows, as if to remind everyone that nature was in complete command of the situation. At that precise instant, the inability of the audience to attend was no longer merely a problem with the logistics. Rather, it was a representation of a city that had come to a complete and utter halt. It brought to light the precarious nature of even the most well-oiled routines, and the way in which a single storm can have a ripple effect, affecting not only transportation and business, but also shared experiences and human bonds. In spite of this, the studio was vacant, which in its own peculiar manner presented an opportunity. In the absence of the immediate input provided by a live audience, the play would need to rely on authenticity, intimacy, and adaptation throughout its performance. Everyone who was participating, from the hosts and producers to the viewers who were watching from a distance, would be put to the test of their resilience. And as the cameras were getting ready to shoot, there was one thing that was certain. Even if there was no audience there, the spirit of connection that characterized Live with Kelly and Mark would have to find a new way to shine through the storm. When it was finally decided that the show would go forward, there was an odd silence that descended upon the studio. The quiet, anticipatory silence that typically falls just before a crowd erupts into applause at the opening theme was not there in this instance. Something very different was happening here. There was a hushed silence that was almost holy, as if the room itself was holding its breath. The broadcast of Live with Kelly and Mark was proceeding as scheduled, but there was not a single person in the audience seating themselves. Within the lengthy history of the show, it was a moment that was both unusual and weird. Those responsible for producing the show gathered around the monitors in the control room to discuss the implications of the decision. There had been some consideration given to completely cancelling the program. However, doing so would have required rearranging the schedule for the entire week, which would have been a source of disappointment for millions of viewers at home, and it may have potentially disrupted guest appearances that had already been confirmed. In addition, postponing presented difficulties. The storm did not show any indication of abating in the near future, and the unpredictability made rescheduling a gamble. In the end, the group came to the conclusion that continuity was important. The show had previously endured a variety of catastrophes, including pandemics, strikes, and technical breakdowns. Nevertheless, this winter storm, despite its fearsome nature, was not going to be able to quiet them. It was almost as if the studio itself was a character in this drama that was being told. A spooky amphitheater of quiet was created by the rows of unoccupied seats, which were typically occupied by people wearing vibrant coats and expressions of happiness. The smooth floors reflected the overhead lights in a more concentrated manner than usual, and the shadows of moving persons were not broken by the reflections. Even the often used pieces of furniture, such as the sofa, the coffee table, and the floral arrangements, appeared to have a new appearance when there was no human presence present. During the performance, stage managers moved stealthily, leaving a tiny echo of their footsteps in areas where clapping and conversation would ordinarily drown out any ambient sounds. Since there would be no audience reactions to cut away to, camera operators altered their positions with extreme caution. They were aware that there would be no audience reactions. More weight would need to be carried by each and every shot. Everything from the close-up to the pan to the transition would be important. Engineers were working in the sound booth to fine-tune the audio levels, anticipating the unsettling clarity that would result from a room that had been designed to accommodate crowd noise being abruptly empty of it. It is possible that every pause would feel unpleasant and every breath would be accentuated if laughing were not present to fill the gaps between words. Multiple tests were performed on the microphones, with technicians paying close attention to detect even the least amount of distortion. The writers, who had developed a script that was full of humorous beats and moments that provided opportunities for audience participation, rushed to rewrite their work. Those jokes that relied on call and response or applause cues were either toned down or eliminated entirely. It was decided to either completely eliminate segments that were intended to involve audience engagement or reinvent them such that they would operate as banter between hosts. The stress was palpable as it was a creative triage that was performed at the very last minute. Ripa and Mark Consuelos were observing the peculiar situation that was taking place in front of them as they stood on the edge of the set. For those who had previously worked in live television, the void felt disconcerting and strangely personal at the same time. A half-laugh of astonishment could be heard coming from Kelly as she shook her head and looked at the empty chairs. "This is a first," she mumbled into her ear. A reassuring smile appeared on Mark's face as he gently gripped her hand. During pandemic lockdowns, they had previously been confronted with cameras without audiences, but this experience felt different. It was less institutional and more like a quantum coincidence. A different tone was adopted by their preparation. They would be forced to rely solely on their instincts and chemistry if they did not have the quick feedback loop of appreciation from the audience in the form of laughter or applause. When they were in the hollowed-out room, they ran through their opening lines, testing the cadence and listening to how their voices traveled across the space. The jokes had a more jagged quality to them, and the emotional beats were more clear. It seemed like you were playing in a theater that was completely empty, and every word you said was echoed back at you. While the director was in the control room, he issued directions with a voice that was composed, but had a hint of adrenaline in it. "We should approach this as if we were having a conversation with the camera," he suggested. "Right now, we are having a conversation with the people who are at home." At the beginning of the countdown to airtime, the team had a calm and determined state of mind. After this point, there was no going back. The red, on-air lights came to life, enveloping the set in a gentle glow that was at once reassuring and strangely unfamiliar. The opening theme music began to play, and the upbeat notes of the music reverberated in an odd manner in the empty area. When Kelly and Mark made their appearance, the audience would often explode into cheers and applaud along with them. However, this particular moment was unlike any other. Rather than that, the hosts left the studio in complete quiet, and the sound of their footfall could be heard against the floor. They made a reflex towards the vacant seats, which was a reflex that had been developed over the course of many years, but then they stopped themselves and chuckled. After she had taken her spot, Kelly took a deep breath and looked directly into the camera. She started off by saying, "Good morning, everybody," with a voice that was warm and steady. As Mark gestured around the empty studio, he chimed in and said, "You might notice something a little different about today's show. It's just yours truly, folks. In spite of our audience's best efforts, the storm outside had other plans." They confronted the matter head-on and explained that due to safety considerations, it was just not possible for anyone to attend in person. They used a tone that was light but real, combining elements of humor and genuine concern for their audience. It was initially jarring to hear that there was no applause following their words. It was as if a punchline had been dropped into a void. On the other hand, they persevered, discovering a cadence that was more conversational and more personal over time. As the program progressed, the unconventional structure started to reveal capabilities that were not anticipated. The rhythm was significantly smoother and more fluid when there were no interruptions in the form of applauding breaks. Reactions from the outside world did not disrupt the natural flow of conversations. With a level of ease that was almost reminiscent of a private conversation between friends, Kelly and Mark leaned into their relationship with one another, exchanging humorous barbs and sincere reactions with one another. Additionally, the guest parts took on a different kind of excitement. There was a change in the dynamic when the first visitor appeared through a video link because there was no live audience present. There was no communal gasp or cheer, nor was there a roar of applause to welcome the arrival. Rather than being conducted in a television studio, the introduction was more personal, giving the impression that the guest was joining them in their living room. As the guest reacted on the emptiness with a mixture of curiosity and sorrow, the conversation strayed into stories about snow days and weather catastrophes, which helped to root the episode in the notion that it was based on common experience. Behind the cameras, members of the team observed with focused attention, acutely aware that this was not a typical day in the office. When a joke was well received or a moment felt particularly emotional, they nodded their heads in agreement and whispered words of support to one another. After some time had passed, some of them revealed that they had been holding their breath throughout the first few minutes of the episode out of fear that it would be awkward or uninteresting. In spite of this, a collective sigh could be heard throughout the studio as the show began to settle into its rhythm. Indeed, the technical difficulties were very genuine. Because there was no noise from the audience, the changes between the segments felt more abrupt. The music stings that were often played to applause now stood out in a very noticeable way. The filmmaker made any necessary adjustments on the spot, lengthening certain scenes and softening others in an effort to preserve a sense of continuity and warmth throughout the film. A real-time adaptation was made by Kelly and Mark. They filled the voids in the conversation with impromptu anecdotes, acknowledged the peculiarity of the circumstance through the use of self-deprecating humor, and communicated specifically with viewers who were at home. It felt less like a performance and more like a moment of shared resilience, a reminder that even routines that someone is accustomed to could be transformed by unexpected circumstances. Something remarkable occurred as the concert went into its middle segments. The absence of an audience stopped seeming like a deficiency and started feeling like a feature. This feeling lasted until the show reached its conclusion. The sincerity of the hosts was heightened by the environment's lack of embellishment. When there is no buffer of group reactions, emotionally charged stories have a greater impact. Intimate confessions were transformed into quiet humor. In addition to its function as a recording device, the camera also served as a medium for communication. One of the segments, which was initially intended to make the audience laugh, ended up taking on a tone that was quite contemplative. The tone of Kelly's voice was noticeably lower than usual as she related a personal story about overcoming uncertainty. Mark paid close attention, nodded his head, and offered some insightful commentary. In a studio that was packed with people, the moment might have been obscured by the noise of applause or conversation. Here, it materialized with unadulterated clarity. Later, viewers at home would observe that the program had a different, in a good way, feeling to it. There was a flood of comments on social media applauding the hosts for their professionalism and their ability to adjust to changing circumstances. Fans expressed how unreal it was to see the seats empty, but they also expressed how reassuring it was to know that the concert would continue despite the threat of the storm. Following the conclusion of the last segment and the rolling of the closing credits, There was neither a standing ovation nor a wave of cheers to send the hosts off in some kind. As they turned to face one another, Kelly and Mark shared a smile of relief and pride with one another, and they laughed quietly to themselves. A modest but emotional acknowledgement of what they had just accomplished was given by the team in the form of a pat on the back. The extremely uncommon episode that did not have an audience had not only occurred, but it had also been successful. Following the conclusion of the event, the producers pondered on the decision with a feeling of peace and satisfaction. Although it had been a risk to continue without an audience, it had also been a demonstration of the resiliency of live television. It had been demonstrated that the show's heart was not limited to the presence of a significant number of people. Rather, it resided in the connection that existed between the hosts, outside continued to roar. However, within those walls, a new and distinctive chapter in the history of the show had just been written. This chapter served as a reminder that the most memorable moments in the show's history are not always the result of grand spectacles, but rather of adaptation, courage, and the willingness to continue when everything seems to be going off without a hitch. Ripa and Mark Consuelos were aware that they could not simply pretend that everything was normal as the cameras began to roll on the episode that was out of the ordinary and attended by no audience. There was no way to overlook the fact that there were seats that were vacant, the silence was too strong, and the conditions were too exceptional. As soon as they stepped onto the set, they made the decision to take a straightforward approach to the situation, openly addressing the winter storm and the absence of the audience. This allowed them to transform a difficult reality into a moment of honesty that they could share with people at home. One of the first people to break the ice was Kelly. She gave the camera a half smile that conveyed both humor and sincerity as she gazed around the studio with a mischievous tilt of her head. She then turned her attention back to the video camera. She began by saying, "So, if you're wondering why it feels like we're broadcasting from a very large living room today, it's because our entire audience got snowed out." Her tone was light, but her eyes expressed genuine worry for the folks who should have been seated just a few feet away from the microphone. Mark added his 2 cents while pointing to the rows that were empty. In his explanation, he stated that today was going to be a day with a full house. Individuals who were enthusiastic, dressed up, and prepared to clap and laugh at the appropriate moment for us. He hesitated for a moment before continuing, but Mother Nature had other plans. He then continued with a quiet grin, and for once, we decided not to fight her. In their explanation, the hosts stated that the storm had rendered travel hazardous and unpredictable, as it had caused public transport to be shut down and highways to become potentially hazardous. Specifically, they emphasized that the decision to proceed without an audience had been made out of concern for the safety of all individuals involved. Kelly exclaimed, "We love our audience too much to ask them to risk slipping on ice just to see us in person. This is because we love them so much. Everyone here is more important than the applause." It was a moment that touched a nerve, because there was no quick reply in the form of laughter or clapping. Their comments remained in the air, bearing a weight that could have been potentially diminished in a studio that was full of people. The announcement seemed less like it was rehearsed, and more like it was a conversation between the hosts and the viewers that expressed genuine emotion. A quick anecdote about Kelly's personal daily journey was recounted by Kelly, who is known for her ability to tell stories. She explained how she was squeezing through snow-covered streets, holding on to the steering wheel with a bit more force than usual, and wondering if she would even be able to make it to the studio at all. "There was a point in time when I thought, this is it. This is how my talk show career comes to an end. Stuck behind a snowplow going 3 miles an hour," she said, eliciting a muted giggle from Mark and a few muffled chuckles from the team that was behind the cameras. After that, Mark related his own story of crossing snowy sidewalks and coming dangerously close to performing an impromptu acrobatic act outside the building during his time there. "I've played a lot of tough guys on TV," he added, "but let me tell you, Nothing humbles you faster than a patch of black ice. He was referring to the fact that he had played tough guys on television. The tone that was established for the remainder of the show was set by their willingness to make light of themselves while also acknowledging the gravity of the issue. These individuals were not merely hosts who were giving material. Rather, they were fellow citizens who were caught in the same storm as their viewers, and they shared the same anxieties and inconveniences. Afterwards, Kelly redirected the attention to the crowd that was not present. The tone of her voice became more gentle as she remarked, "We are aware that some of you probably had tickets for today and were really looking forward to being here. We are so sorry that we were unable to invite you inside the studio, but we assure you that we will make it up to you in the future. Take this day as a rain check, or more accurately, a snow check." As a sign of agreement, Mark nodded. "And for everyone who is watching from home, perhaps you are also confined to your flat," he continued. "We're going to keep you company today, so prepare yourself. In an effort to provide you with some warmth, some humor, and hopefully some distraction from shoveling your driveway, we are going to bring you some of these things." The peculiarity of the situation was not something that they avoided at any cost. Both Kelly and Mark continued to make references to the vacant studio for the entirety of the broadcast, incorporating it into their humor. At one point, after Kelly had delivered a joke that would typically be welcomed with laughter, she paused in a theatrical manner, glanced around, and then exclaimed, "Wow." Mark pretended to look around the empty seats for a response, while he played along with the phrase, "tough crowd." In a deadpan tone, he said, "Today they are a very quiet group." The self-aware humor that was displayed in these instances served a twofold purpose. They acknowledged what the audience was already noticing, and in order to avoid any awkwardness that might have arisen, they turned it into a comedy that everyone laughed at together. They did not act as if the quiet did not exist. Rather, they embraced it, turning a lack of presence into a hilarious presence. On the other hand, there was a genuine sense of thanks and concern that ran beneath the jokes. Kelly paused for a moment to express her gratitude to the crew members who had made it through the storm and made it inside. With her eyes gleaming with gratitude, she made a move away from the camera. She expressed her gratitude by saying, "I just want to say how grateful we are to everyone working behind the scenes today. These individuals risked the weather in order for us to present this show to you. What a dedication that is." Mark expressed the same emotions as she did, adding that they wished for everyone who was watching to remain safe and refrain from traveling for no reason. "Do not go out if you do not have to," he suggested. "Take the day off. Your couch is someone you can count on today." This choice by the hosts to confront the matter in an open manner struck a chord with the audience. The absence of an audience in the episode gave the impression of being planned, thoughtful, and human, rather than a malfunction or a mistake to the audience. The fact that the hosts, crew, and spectators were all connected by the same winter storm served to emphasize the sense of community that was there. While Kelly was thinking about it, she mused on how uncommon it was to watch a midday chat program that did not have a live audience. At that moment, she remarked, "This is one for the record books. People are going to be saying things like, 'Remember that time Kelly and Mark put on a show for literally no one?' This is going to happen in the future." Mark chuckled to himself. He said, "We are basically pioneers in this field." How to host a talk show in a blizzard is the subject that will be covered in the Broadcasting School education program. The fans who might have been concerned about the absence of the audience were also given the opportunity to receive reassurance. In order to clarify, Kelly stated, "We did not cancel on anyone. We decided to set their visit back. They are going to come back, and when they do, we are going to be more noisy than usual." From the beginning of the broadcast until the end, their on-air acknowledgements progressed from being explanatory to being reflective. During the more reflective moments, Kelly shared her thoughts on the unpredictability of life and how there were times when one simply needed to adjust. She was thinking to herself, You plan and plan and plan, and then a snowstorm shows up and rewrites your script. Mark offered his own point of view, discussing the importance of perseverance and how it is essential to be present, even when things are not going according to plan. His statement was, "We could have called it a day. However, we desired to be present for the people who were watching. In an effort to maintain a sense of normalcy, we wanted." As a result of these reflections, the episode had a more profound emotional dimension. In the face of disruption, it was not just a matter of a missing audience. Rather, it was a matter of adaptability, perseverance, and connection. As a result of the storm, the typical elements of a live show were removed, exposing the essence of the event, which consisted of two individuals communicating with millions of other people, exchanging stories, laughter, and moments of empathy. Both Kelly and Mark brought up the subject of the storm and the absence of the crowd once more as the episode was drawing to a close. Kelly had a friendly and sincere expression on her face as she looked into the camera. The statement that she made was, "We miss you all, everyone who was supposed to be here today. We pray that you are well and remain warm. Also, we are looking forward to meeting you in person very soon." Mark trailed behind, his tone remaining unwavering and genuine. "Thanks for being a part of our audience today, everyone who is watching from the comfort of their own homes. In your spirit, you filled these seats that were vacant." The significance of what they had achieved was encapsulated in a single line, despite its apparent simplicity. In spite of the fact that the studio was physically empty, the show did not have a sense of emptiness. It seemed to be brimming with humanity, humor, and heart and soul. Kelly and Mark gave each other a quiet high five as the cameras finally stopped rolling and the red lights that indicated that they were on air began to dim. Through their ability to gracefully and authentically navigate an unusual situation, they were able to transform a logistical challenge into a moment of connection that will be remembered forever. They had done more than just explain a circumstance when they addressed the winter storm and the audience that was absent throughout the broadcast. By allowing viewers to share in their vulnerability and inviting them into their reality, they had reaffirmed a connection that exists between a show and its audience. In spite of the fact that the storm was able to dampen the applause in the studio, it had heightened something that would last for a much longer period of time: the feeling that the show's heart would always find a way to communicate with its audience, even in the most unforeseen circumstances. The storm that was occurring outside was still raging when the closing credits rolled on the episode of Live with Kelly and Mark that was broadcast without an audience. However, a very different kind of energy had begun to swirl online by the time the episode ended. Almost instinctively, viewers who had tuned in from their living rooms, kitchens, or snowbound bedrooms reached for their mobile devices and laptops to watch the broadcast. Within a matter of minutes, social media platforms were flooded with responses, transforming the unusual broadcast into a topic that was trending and transforming a quiet moment in the studio into a loud conversation on the internet. The initial influx of posts came from devoted followers who were quick to recognize that something was not being done correctly. "Am I the only one who notices that the studio is empty today?" On Twitter, one viewer posted a screenshot of Kelly and Mark standing in front of rows of empty seats, and they attached the screenshot to their tweet. Another person commented, "This feels like an episode of Live with Kelly and Mark, but is set in a dream sequence. Who is everyone, exactly?" As soon as the hosts informed the audience about the situation regarding the winter storm, the confusion was quickly replaced by comprehension. After the viewers had a better understanding of what had transpired, the online conversation shifted from one of curiosity to one of compassion. In a post on Instagram, a fan expressed their happiness, saying, "So glad they didn't make the audience risk traveling in that storm. Safety first, always." Others reiterated this sentiment, praising the show for putting the well-being of its audience members ahead of the spectacle. One of the comments read, "This is the reason why I love this show. They have concern for the people they serve." A great number of viewers have expressed their admiration for Kelly, Ripa and Mark Consuelos, thanking them for their ability to carry the show without the typical energy of the audience. Have you ever hosted a chat show that had no viewers? This is not an easy task, a viewer on Twitter said. They handled it like professionals, Kelly and Mark. An additional person stated, "Honestly, this episode felt even more intimate than the previous one. Still hilarious, still warm, and still engaging. It seemed as though we were all simply hanging out together." Some of the viewers remarked that they found the studio that was empty to be eerily stirring. In one of the posts, it was stated that the silence made everything feel more real. Others described the episode as cozy, calm, and comforting, noting that it complemented the snow day vibe that many of them were experiencing at home. "It was kind of beautiful in a weird way," said one of the individuals. It goes without saying that humor played a significant part in the reaction on social media. The spectators couldn't help but poke fun at the visually peculiar situation of the unfilled seats in the audience. Quickly, memes began to appear on the internet. The caption for one of the most popular images read, "Me showing up to work after the storm. Empty vibes only." Another image included a wide shot of the empty studio with the phrase, "When you throw a party, but forget to send the invites." The tweet that went viral contained a still image of Kelly delivering a punchline to silence, and it was followed by the remark, which read, "When your joke doesn't land, but you pretend it did." Kelly later liked the tweet, which further fueled the excitement of her fans. A number of viewers made jokes about how the episode seemed to be reminiscent of broadcasts from the time of the pandemic. According to one of the posts, "This is giving 2020 energy." Others made allusion to conventional television clichés, referring to it as the bottle episode of daytime talk shows. "All we need now is Kelly and Mark hosting from their kitchen," said one of the commentators. Despite this, there was a genuine sense of appreciation that was present underlying the jokes. Fans expressed their gratitude to the whole production team for their efforts in making the concept possible despite the difficult circumstances. An individual on Instagram said, "Shout out to the crew who braved that storm to keep us entertained," and they were right. Another person chimed in saying, "This episode could not have been easy to pull off. You all are heroes, with the utmost regard." Additionally, viewers who were in possession of tickets for the day's taping participated in the online conversation. Some people expressed their dissatisfaction, but the majority of them did it with a sense of humor and understanding. One of the fans tweeted a snapshot of snow that had piled up high outside their window along with the caption, "We were supposed to be in the audience today, but the storm had other plans. Despite this, I continue to watch from home. We'll be back in a short while." There were also comments made by tourists who had traveled to the city just for the show. One of the guests tweeted, "I flew in just to see live with Kelly and Mark, but I got snowed out. But to tell you the truth, this episode made it all worthwhile." Someone else remarked, "I was unable to make it to the studio, but it was strangely comforting to see the empty seats on television. What a story to tell. Thankfully, I wasn't the only one." A number of well-known people, including broadcasters and celebrities, have expressed their support and solidarity with the cause. Through a tweet, a well-known morning show presenter from a different network said, "I want to give major props to Kelly and Mark for persevering through the absence of an audience." The comic said, "I perform to empty rooms all the time. This is the epitome of live television at its highest degree. Both Kelly and Mark, you have arrived in my universe." Amplification of the fan response was achieved through the official social media accounts of the show, which reposted memes, words of gratitude, and comments of support. In one of the Instagram stories, there was a photo of the studio that was taken behind the scenes, and the caption read, "Our quietest audience ever. Thanks for being here with us today from the comfort of your own home." The post received hundreds of likes in a matter of hours. The discourse that was taking place online was joined by Kelly and Mark themselves after the program. A brief video footage of Kelly waving at the empty seats was uploaded to her Instagram account, along with the caption, "We missed you all today." Mark posted a picture of the snowy streets outside the studio with the comment, "Mother Nature." 1. He thanked everyone for watching and for remaining safe. The live audience is equal to 0. However, we still managed to put on a fantastic show. Emojis of hearts, snowflakes, and words of encouragement were posted in abundance in the comment areas of the website by the fans. One of your followers wrote, "You two went above and beyond today." One person wrote, "It was as if you were speaking to me directly." Another person said, "This episode was strangely soothing. The ideal television for a snow day." A wider range of debates regarding flexibility and resilience were also spawned as a result of the unprecedented broadcast. A number of viewers pondered on the ways in which the program could be compared to their own disturbed habits. In one of the posts, it was written that so many things got cancelled today because of the storm. The fact that Kelly and Mark continue to show up served as a reminder to me that we are in a position to deal with anything life throws at us. Several individuals expressed how invigorating it was to witness a large television production embracing the concept of imperfection. According to a fan's message, everything does not have to be polished and perfect all the time always. I absolutely adored how this episode had a genuine feel to it. In the future, there were even calls for more episodes that did not involve the audience. One of the viewers tweeted, "I'm not suggesting that we should get rid of the audience for good, but this vibe was kind of nice." One more person wrote, "Can we have one quiet episode every month? It's intimate, it's chill, and there are no interruptions. Are you looking for a friend?" The online buzz was picked up by several media outlets, which then published articles that highlighted the emotions of fans and commended the show for how successfully it handled the situation. The show was referred to as unexpectedly charming and a testament to live television's resilience in the headlines. The production team felt a sense of relaxation and satisfaction as they scrolled through the massive amount of good feedback that they received, not only in terms of ratings, but also in terms of goodwill. The bet they took to go without an audience had paid off. Members of the crew celebrated the collaborative effort that had been put out in order to pull off the show by sharing screenshots of encouraging remarks that had been posted in their group chats. The discourse that was taking place online showed no signs of slowing down as the day progressed and the storm continued to cover the city. Later on, fans who had been absent during the live broadcast were able to catch up with the show and add their voices to the chorus. Someone who viewed the episode late wrote, "Wow, I just watched the episode with the empty audience. I was not anticipating that I would become emotional over a talk show today." By the time nighttime arrived, what had begun as a challenge in terms of logistics had evolved into a moment of shared cultural experience. It had become a symbol of tenacity, inventiveness, and connection in the face of disruption, because the episode of Live with Kelly and Mark, that was the only one of its kind to appear without an audience. This episode had carved itself into the memory of viewers, owing in large part to the fans who magnified it online. In a world where so much stuff comes and goes without leaving a trace, this episode had etched itself into the memories of viewers. An otherwise quiet studio had been transformed into a noisy demonstration of the power of community as a result of their responses, which were humorous, emotional, thoughtful, and supportive. Despite the fact that the storm caused the studio seats to be empty, it was able to fill the feeds of social media with feelings of warmth, humor, and unity. Even when circumstances remove the traditional comforts of clapping and crowds, the connection between a show and its audience may still shine, sometimes even brighter than it did before. This was the sense that many of the fans took about with them as they signed off for the night. I would like to know the conclusion of this news. Despite the fact that the winter storm gradually began to relax its hold on the city, the rare audience-free edition of Live with Kelly and Mark continued to remain in the thoughts of viewers as something more than merely a weather-related incident. A situation that started out as an unavoidable disturbance turned out to be a striking reminder of the resiliency of live television and the unbreakable tie that exists between a show and its audience. In spite of the fact that there were empty seats, there was no applause, and the conditions were uncertain, Kelly Ripa, Mark Consuelos, and their hard-working team demonstrated that connection does not require a physical crowd. Rather, it is found in sincerity, adaptation, and shared experiences. This atypical broadcast will be remembered as a chapter in the history of the show that is both silent and unforgettable long after the snow has melted and the studio has once again been filled with people.